She didn't scream. People always imagine you scream. That the knees go first, then the voice, then whatever it was inside you that still believed things. But Imani Carter stood in the doorway of her own bedroom on a quiet Tuesday morning in Seoul, and she made no sound at all. She just looked. The white duvet, slightly displaced. Pale winter light through curtains she had chosen herself. A woman's hand, manicured, still, resting across the chest of her husband. And then she looked at his face. That was the part that stayed. Not the woman. His face. Ji-hoon's eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling, unblinking, like a man staring at something the rest of the room couldn't see. Not guilty. Not asleep. Wearing an expression she had no word for. Something that looked, if she was being precise, like grief. Not the kind that follows a mistake. The kind that follows a decision you made knowing the cost. She walked to the dresser, slid the ring from her finger, set it down without sound. The way you set something down when you've already decided and don't want to give yourself a reason to reconsider. Then she left. What she didn't know, standing in that doorway, reading everything she thought she was reading, was that the thing she was looking at had been arranged. Every piece of it. And the man lying in that bed had spent months trying to make sure she never saw any of it. He failed her. That part is true, but not in the way she thinks. If you're here for the first time, welcome to Forbidden Love Stories. Subscribe and hit the notification bell, because where this one goes, you will not want to miss a step. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Imani Carter grew up in Atlanta, Georgia. Not the romanticized version, the real one. Gardenias through chain link. Gospel through thin walls on Sunday mornings. A mother who raised her alone and never called it a sacrifice because in that house, you didn't name the weight. You just carried it. What it gave Imani, early and permanently, was the ability to read a room, to find the thing that didn't fit. She became an architectural designer, someone paid to look at existing structures and locate the hidden logic inside them. What was load-bearing? What was decorative? What would fall if you touched the wrong piece? She was 3 slides into a presentation in a Manhattan conference room, a room that had already decided it wasn't interested, when the door opened and Ji-hoon Kim walked in. 40 minutes late. No apology. He moved to the head of the table the way certain men occupy rooms, like the space had been waiting. CEO of Kim International. 34 years old. The stillness of a man who had learned long ago to make other people fill the silence. He looked at her presentation, not at her, at the work, for 90 seconds. Then he raised one hand. Continue, but skip to the structural reconfiguration model. The room didn't move, but something about how he said it, not dismissive, genuinely focused, like a man already past where everyone else was standing, made Imani go to slide 11 without hesitation. She presented it. He asked 3 questions no one else had thought to ask. When the room emptied, he stayed seated and said without looking up, "Send me your independent portfolio." Not the agency version. Yours. She did. He called 2 days later. Himself, not an assistant. "I want to bring you on for the Seoul expansion. Relocation included. 48 hours. She took 36. That was how Imani Carter arrived in South Korea. And for a long time, for longer than she'd later be comfortable admitting, it felt like the best decision she'd ever made. What neither of them planned was everything that came after. The way professional became something else, so gradually there was no single moment to point to as the crossing. Late evenings over site schematics that stretched past midnight without either of them suggesting they stop. Dinners that stopped being business somewhere around the 4th one. The way Ji-hoon, who kept everyone in his life at a calibrated distance, would sometimes just look at her when she wasn't looking. Not the way men look at women they want. The way someone looks at something they haven't categorized yet and aren't ready to. They were careful for nearly a year. His world didn't make room for this, and they both knew it. But careful has a shelf life. By the time Ji-hoon told her he loved her, he had already spoken to his lawyers. He knew the cost. He had decided to pay it. What he hadn't fully priced in was his father. Chairman Kim Sung-bae had built an empire across 5 decades through methods that looked, from a distance, like strategy. Closer in, they looked more like removal. Quiet. Complete. Leaving almost nothing to trace. He was 71 years old, and had the particular quality of stillness that belongs to men who have stopped needing to hurry. Things happened when he wanted them to happen. Occasionally, they happened before he'd said anything at all. Ji-hoon had never been raised as a son, exactly. He'd been raised as an heir, as the next sentence of something the chairman had been writing his entire life. Feelings, in that context, were never part of the draft. When Ji-hoon brought Imani to Sunday dinner at the family estate, the chairman was gracious. Genuinely so, in the surface sense. He asked thoughtful questions. He complimented her work. And then Ji-hoon stepped out of the room for 2 minutes, and the chairman looked across the table at this composed, precise woman from Atlanta and said, still wearing the same expression, as though the register of the room hadn't shifted, "You're remarkable. Anyone can see why he chose you. But there is always a distance between what a man chooses and what a man needs. I'm sure you understand." Imani held his gaze, said nothing, picked up her glass. She filed it. She always filed things. Ji-hoon proposed 8 months later, just the two of them on the rooftop of her Seoul apartment, the city spread below them, him holding her hands and saying only, "I want you as my family. Everything else is noise. Say yes." She said yes. They married small. 50 people, Atlanta and Seoul in one room, her mother weeping quietly in the front row. Ji-hoon holding Imani's hands at the altar with the grip of a man planting his feet. Choosing it. Deliberately. The chairman attended. He toasted them warmly. He embraced his son. He smiled through the whole ceremony. She noticed that too. She filed it. For a year, they built something real. A home in Hanamdong with clean lines and warm rooms that held both of them without either disappearing. Ji-hoon came home in a way that surprised everyone who knew him. Deliberately, like he was choosing it each time, like he understood that home was not a place you arrived at, but something you kept deciding. She taught him to rest, which didn't come naturally. He taught her Hangul at the kitchen table on Saturday mornings, barley tea between them, grits on the stove, both of them slightly ridiculous and entirely at ease. When the clinic confirmed she was pregnant, Ji-hoon sat beside the examination table and put his face in his hands and didn't speak for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. Not sad. Undone in the way that only happens when something you didn't dare want fully arrives. "We're building something," he said. Not really to her. More like something he needed to say out loud, to whatever version of himself had survived long enough to be in this room. She took his hand. "We already did. This is just what's next." She was 14 weeks along when things began to shift. Not as a storm, as weather. Small changes in pressure you could almost explain away. What Imani didn't know was that Ji-hoon had been called in. The chairman's office on the 48th floor had a particular stillness Ji-hoon had learned as a child to read correctly. It was still that afternoon. The chairman slid a document across the desk without greeting, a projections report, dense with figures, outlining a proposed alliance between Kim International and the Yoon Group. Shipping, telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, the kind of merger that would make the empire structurally untouchable for generations. "The Yoon family has one condition," the chairman said. Ji-hoon already knew. "Say-ri," he said. Flat. The chairman nodded once. The nod of a man confirming something he considers settled. Yoon Se-ri. Ji-hoon had known her since childhood. Their families aligned in the way powerful families align. Not through affection, but through proximity and shared interest. There had been an understanding once. The kind never written down, but passed along anyway through careful silences and deliberate introductions. Se-ri had carried that understanding her entire adult life. She had never updated it to account for the fact that Ji-hoon did not share it. She had been waiting for him to remember what she had already decided was inevitable. "Imani is my wife," Ji-hoon said. "She is carrying my child." The chairman looked at him with something that was not unkindness exactly. Colder than unkindness. The specific expression of a man who has already removed emotion from a calculation and is faintly impatient with anyone who hasn't. That situation can be resolved. A settlement. The child is provided for. This does not need to be complicated. Ji-hoon stood. "We're done here." The chairman let him get almost to the door. "Ji-hoon." He stopped. Didn't turn. "I built this empire so that you would never have to fear anything in this world. Do not make me protect it from you." Ji-hoon took the elevator down alone. He stood in the lobby of the building his father had built and turned the words over until he found the thing inside them he hadn't let himself look at directly. It wasn't a warning. It was an announcement. And underneath it, barely covered, was something with a different shape entirely. something that had nothing to do with settlements or business, and everything to do with Imani still being in Seoul when it was finished. He didn't go home that night. He needed to build something. Fast. Before his father did. The decision that would cost him everything was this. He would not tell Imani. Not because he didn't trust her. Because he knew her. He knew that if she understood the shape of what was moving toward her, she would face it directly, with precision, without flinching, the way she faced everything. And a direct confrontation with his father, from where Imani stood, was not a fight she could survive intact. The chairman had resources that didn't announce themselves. He had lawyers, board members, 50 years of practice making problems disappear without leaving a visible mark. Ji-hoon sat alone in the car outside his own home for a long time before he went inside. He made two decisions. The first, he would perform. In every space his father's network might be watching, Ji-hoon would behave like a man slowly complying. Coming home later. Creating a visible distance between himself and Imani. Allowing Se-ri to exist at the edges of his public life without being pushed away. He would let the narrative build. That Ji-hoon Kim was coming around. That the heir was remembering where he belonged. Every step backward in public was cover for what he was doing in private. The second, he brought in director Park. Park had reported to Ji-hoon for 6 years. Meticulous. Discreet. The kind of loyal built through consistency rather than declaration, which Ji-hoon had always considered the only kind worth trusting. He briefed him in pieces, never the full picture at once, and set him to work inside the company's financial records. Deeper than ordinary due diligence. Looking for the kind of documentation that turns leverage into certainty. He didn't tell Imani about Park, either. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself she would understand, once it was over, why it had to be this way. He told himself that a lot. That it was temporary. He came home one evening to find her standing at the kitchen window with her tea going cold in her hands, staring at the city. She heard him come in. She turned around. Looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Something careful, patient, like someone waiting for a structure to show her what it was really made of. She said, "Good evening." She didn't ask where he'd been. She never asked. She watched. She waited. He understood that about her. And he also understood that her watching was not passive. She was reading something. He didn't know yet exactly how much she'd read. She noticed everything. The later arrivals. The shorter conversations. The way he answered her questions with the measured neutrality of a man choosing his words from behind glass. Se-ri appeared in the margins of things, a name in a photograph caption, a face at an event he'd attended without mentioning. Ji-hoon didn't explain, didn't hide it exactly. Just let it exist in the space between them the way you leave something for someone to find when you want them to find it, but don't want to be the one to show it. She lay awake one night with the bed empty beside her, and one hand flat on her stomach, and she thought about what she knew how to do. She knew how to look at a structure and find the thing that didn't fit. She knew the difference between load-bearing and decorative. She knew what fell when you removed the wrong piece. She thought, look at this carefully. She thought, don't. She had chosen this man with full knowledge of his world. She had chosen to believe that what they had built was real. So she closed her eyes. She stayed. She told herself she was being steady. She did not tell herself she wasn't afraid. Director Park disappeared on a Thursday. Ji-hoon called 14 times. No answer. By Friday afternoon, Park resurfaced. Calm, apologetic, a family emergency, the documents nearly ready. His voice had the particular evenness of a man who has rehearsed what he's about to say. Ji-hoon noticed it. He told himself it was the stress of the work. He believed what he wanted to believe, because the alternative meant starting over with nothing and no time left. What had happened in those 48 hours, Ji-hoon would only piece together later. The chairman had a way of finding the exact thing a person needed and providing it without asking for anything in return. Nothing stated. Nothing threatened. The debt simply disappeared, and in its place, without either of them needing to say so, was an understanding. It was a method the chairman had used many times. It was reliable precisely because it left no evidence of force, only gratitude, which was harder to walk back. After that, the direction Ji-hoon had been moving was no longer his alone. The chairman read everything, set it down, sat quietly for a moment in the way men sit when a situation has confirmed what they already suspected. Then he made a phone call. Not to his attorney this time. A different one. Yoon Se-ri received the call that same evening. She had been waiting for one like it for a long time. She asked only one question when the chairman had finished speaking. When? That was the entirety of her hesitation. There are things she understood about the night that was being arranged and things she chose not to examine. She understood enough. She knew whose alarm would sound at 6:15, whose footsteps would come down the hall, what Imani Carter would find when she opened that door. She knew all of it, and she went anyway. That is the particular shape of wanting that has been left to itself for too long. The kind that is fed on certainty and waiting until it no longer needs to consult anything outside itself. Se-ri had spent years telling herself that Ji-hoon's marriage was an interruption, that Imani was a circumstance the right conditions would eventually correct. By the time those conditions arrived, she did not stop to feel the weight of what she was agreeing to. She felt only relief, the long overdue sense of something being returned to its rightful position. She thought about Ji-hoon. She did not think about Imani. She had never learned how to think about anyone else for very long. The message arrived on Ji-hoon's phone on a Saturday night. It came from Park's number. It said there were documents at the company penthouse that needed to be retrieved before morning. Ji-hoon read it standing in the hallway, Imani asleep down the hall. He left a note on the kitchen counter, brief, ordinary, and he left without waking her. The penthouse was already set when he arrived. Lights low. His preferred drink waiting on the side table. He hadn't called ahead. He noticed the detail, briefly, the way you notice weather from inside a warm room. Something registering at the edge without quite reaching the center. He was exhausted in the specific way of a man who has been carrying something in secret for too long. He poured the drink. He worked. By midnight, the edges of his thoughts were softening in ways he attributed to the hour. By 1, he was in a chair he didn't remember moving to. By 3, he was still, eyes open, somewhere the room couldn't reach. He couldn't move. He understood what was happening, understood it with the particular, terrible clarity that comes when everything you were trying to prevent arrives anyway, and there is nothing left to do but be inside it. Se-ri was already there. She had been told Ji-hoon wanted to see her, that the timing was right, that this was the moment she had been waiting for. She believed it because she had always believed it, in one form or another. The story she had told herself since she was young, dressed now in the specific details of an arranged room and a man who couldn't speak. She felt something was wrong. She did not ask about it. She chose the wanting. She always chose the wanting. Before 4 in the morning, they were moved. A key that had been copied from Ji-hoon's set years earlier, quietly, without comment, long before tonight, felt like a possibility. Into the house in Hanamdong. Into the bedroom with the curtains Imani had chosen. Into the white duvet, arranged with the precision of something meant to be found. At 6:15, Imani's alarm went off. She reached across the bed before she was fully awake. The sheet was cold, not recently vacated. She lay still for a moment, just noticing, not thinking yet. Then she rose slowly and walked down the hall. There was light under the bedroom door. She stopped. That wire-thin instinct she had been carrying since childhood, the one that had kept her safe in rooms others hadn't read correctly, pulled taut inside her chest. She stood outside the door for 3 full seconds, pressed her palm flat against the wood, the way you check a surface before you commit to it. Then she opened the door. White duvet, morning light, a hand, not hers, resting across her husband's chest, and Ji-hoon's eyes, open, fixed on the ceiling with that expression she had no word for. Not guilty, not pleasure, not sleep. Something that looked, if she was being precise, like a man who had been waiting for this to happen and was now simply inside it. She stood there longer than she would remember. Then she walked to the dresser, removed her ring, set it down without sound, left. She did not look back. She had learned long ago that looking back was how you talked yourself into staying somewhere you'd already decided to leave. She packed without deciding to. Her hands moved while the rest of her was somewhere else entirely. One bag. The things that were hers before soul, before any of this had a name. She called her mother. Her voice came out even and she heard it happen. The old reflex, composure arriving before grief did, trained into her by a childhood that didn't have space for falling apart in front of anyone. Her mother talked about the garden. Imani said, She booked the flight. In the car, she kept one hand on her stomach and watched Seoul move past the window in the gray morning light. The Han River. The bakery on the corner that opened early enough for her insomniac mornings. The city she had memorized the way she memorized every structure she worked with. Its weight, its center, what would fall if you removed the wrong piece. She understood now what was load-bearing. She understood now that she had built on it. At the airport, she moved through the motions with the terrible efficiency of someone who has gone numb and hasn't noticed yet. Security. Gate. A seat by the window where she could see the tarmac and not be seen. She set her bag on her lap, her phone face down on her knee. She sat very still, not calm, nothing like calm, but still the way something goes still when it is keeping itself together by force alone. The things she'd held back in the car were arriving now. The weeks of cold mornings. The door closing when she asked what was happening. Se-ri in photographs, at events, existing in the margins of Ji-hoon's life with a familiarity that had never been explained and never been hidden. The particular way he had said, "Nothing that concerns you." Not cruel, which was almost worse. Just final. The careful, deliberate closing of a door. She thought about his face. She kept coming back to it. Those open eyes, fixed on the ceiling. Not guilty. She knew what guilt looked like, had enough architecture to recognize the structure of it, and not pleasure, and not sleep. Something that looked like grief. The deliberate kind. The accepting kind. The kind you see on a man who watched something arrive and couldn't stop it. She thought, I know how to read structures. She thought, what if I've misread this one? She let the thought sit. It was not a comfortable thought. She did not push it away. The child moved. Just once, a small, deliberate shift, the kind that still caught her off guard no matter how many times it happened. And something in her chest cracked along a seam she hadn't known was there. Just for a second. Just enough. She looked down at her hands in her lap. One of them was shaking. Slightly. She hadn't noticed when it started. She pressed it flat against her thigh and held it there until it stopped. And then she looked back at the window and she breathed. Once, carefully, the kind of breath that is less about air and more about deciding. She would not fall apart in this airport. That was the one thing she was certain of. The boarding announcement came overhead. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't answer it. It rang through. She watched the screen until it stopped. Around her, people gathered their things and moved toward the gate, the ordinary forward momentum of people with destinations. She should be one of them. She had a ticket, a seat, a mother waiting on the other end who didn't know anything was wrong. The phone buzzed again. She answered. The voice was a man's. Controlled, but only just, the sound of controlled when something is pushing against it from the inside. He spoke quietly. Too quietly. The register of a man in a room where certain things cannot be heard. Mrs. Kim. The name landed wrong. She had always kept Carter. Had never stopped being Carter. She didn't correct him. Something in the way he said it. Not casual, careful, like a sentence he had prepared, held her still. I need you to hear me before you make a decision. I don't have much time. A pause. She heard him breathe. My name is Park. I've been working inside the company. With your husband. He stopped again. Something shifted in the background of wherever he was. Movement. A surface. A door. When he came back, he was closer to the phone. Lower. There are things I did that I cannot undo. I know that. But there is one thing I might still be able to correct, and it starts with you staying on this phone. Imani said nothing. Her hand tightened slowly around the phone. What you saw this morning was not what it was. He said it evenly, like a man who knows how something sounds and has chosen to say it anyway. Ji-hoon found out his father had something in motion against you. Against you and the child. Everything that changed after that, the distance, the coldness, Se-ri at those events, was cover. He was trying to build something that would make his father stop. He brought me in to help him do it. And then his father found me first. A pause. Longer this time. When he came back, his voice had dropped further. I am not a safe person to trust right now. You should know that going in. I'm telling you anyway because what I did is what put you in that airport and put that ring on that dresser, and I cannot fix most of it. His voice fractured almost imperceptibly. Steadied. But if you get on that plane, you will land exactly where it was designed for you to land. Away from Ji-hoon. Away from anything you'd need to understand what actually happened. And your child will grow up inside a version of events that was written by someone who arranged last night. And Ji-hoon, he stopped. Ji-hoon will not be able to reach you from inside it. The gate sealed behind her with a soft, final sound. Imani stared through the window at the gray Seoul morning, at the plane, at the city she had memorized. The man on the phone was not telling her everything. She could feel the shape of what he was withholding, the way you feel a room in the dark, by where the edges were, by what her hands couldn't reach. He had already admitted he wasn't safe to trust. He had already told her he'd betrayed her husband. He might be telling her the truth because he meant it. He might be offering a truth-shaped thing because he'd been given a second role to play. She had no way to know. She thought about Ji-hoon coming home late, performing coldness as cover. This man was saying, every step back, a step forward somewhere she couldn't see. She thought about standing in the dark at 2 in the morning reading a structure she couldn't quite name. She thought about the wall she'd felt going up around her for weeks and not knowing if it was a wall going up against her or one being built to keep something else out. She thought about his eyes, that expression, that grief. Her hand pressed so hard against her stomach she could feel her own pulse in her palm. She did not stand. She did not move toward the gate. She sat in the hard plastic airport chair with the phone against her ear and the city behind the glass and everything she had built sitting on the other side of one word. She said, "Talk." And she began to listen. If this story reached somewhere it wasn't supposed to, like it, share it, and subscribe so you're here when the next chapter drops. I need to know, you are in that airport chair. You have everything Imani has and nothing she doesn't. The man on the phone has already told you he cannot be trusted. Do you stay on the line? Do you believe him? Tell me what you would do, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one.